What's happening, travelers? Nissan Mosery here, the traveling investor. What's happening? So this week I find myself back in Boca, but not for long because on Monday I'm heading out again. That's right. I'm living up to my name, the traveling investor. I'm going back out to Atlanta. I'm going to be at the IMN conference, networking, schmoozing, and schmingling. That's a combination of schmoozing and mingling that I kind of created. So it's a schmingle. We're going to go schmingle. And, it's all about your network, right? It's all about growing your network. It's all about knowing people and getting people to know you, like you, and trust you. And it's really important because the strength of your network, the depth of your network will help you achieve success, because you can go into that network of people that you know and pull out information and pull out, other people's knowledge and expertise and money and so forth. So, that's why I love going to all these different events. So I'm going to be there. And then, of course, going to be walking our 118 unit complex in Buckhead that we have under contract. That's pretty amazing that we're just putting that offering out now to accredited investors only. So we're going to be walking that property as well. We're going to be checking out the area, networking. I'm going to be driving to the properties that we own out there as well. And guess what? I'm going to be surprising my managers, because you always want to surprise them. Surprising them is great because it's a surprise. They don't have a chance to get ready, right? They don't have a chance to make it look pretty and whatnot. And it all comes together by understanding your business plan, by understanding who you are and what your goals are and what you bring to the table. And this week, our guest is an awesome gentleman. His name is Ladislas Maurice. I want to tell you a little bit about him before we bring him on. He did his BBA at Bishop's University in Canada. And check this out. He's got a Master's of International Business and Law from the University of Sydney in Australia. Canada, Australia. Guy likes to bounce around like me, right? I'm the traveling investor. Guess what his name is? He's the wandering investor. So we have a lot of things in common, and it's going to be exciting to hear about the different stories. Worked for 7 years for Nestle's, the big food company in the headquarters in Switzerland. And it's funny because I used to work for a company in the stock market on Wall Street that actually brought Nestle's over to the US. So we can talk a little bit about Nestle's and how that works over there. And then in Africa, the guy was in Africa for many, many years. His last role in Africa was on the executive board of Nestle's in Ghana, where he was running the dairy business in a few West African countries. He left there and he became a full-time investor. So for those of you listening in that are thinking, do I get into investing? What is it all about? Listen to where this guy came from, and we're going to talk about why he made the jump from the corporate world into the investing world. And he focuses on, what does he focus on? Emerging and frontier markets, right? Not only that, but he likes to travel to countries with interesting macro stories. And he spends significant time on the ground to really understand those markets. And that's super important when you're going into a new market. And we always talk about that, right? We always talk about going into new markets, how to identify those markets, knowing those markets like the back of your hand, right? And in some cases, in some of the real estate deals he gets involved in, they're quite risky, right? Like buying in African countries after some civil war. So talking about a country coming out, right? Talk about your market cycles, right? We talk about market cycles on the state level, city level. And he's talking about countries that are coming out of civil war, right? Operating in countries with poor judicial systems. That's one of the reasons why I don't like to veer out of the US, because you never know what's going to happen. So you know what? Without me, I talk too much. Right. So right now, let me bring on Ladislas Maurice. What's happening, my man? How are you?
Good, good. How are you, Nissan?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for being here, man. You're probably super busy, you know, traveling, enjoying life, and making a crap load of money. So, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
I
So,
love. We were discussing earlier when I was looking for a brand name. I probably Googled the traveling investor before, and and you already had it. So I went with the wandering investor.
that's right. There you go. The wandering investor. Yeah. So, incredible background that you have, right? From Masters of International Business and Law to working for Nestle's, going into different African countries. So, why don't you take us back to the guy who was in or going for, his BBA, right? Who were you back then, right? What were your kind of, your world views at that point, right? And then, take us through that life and then your pivot. Like, shit, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. What was that? What was that little switch?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I knew from as soon when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to work in emerging markets, and not just because of it's more challenging and it's more dynamic in many ways, it's more fun, but also because it's the fastest way to make money. Because ultimately, my goal was always freedom. And how do you obtain freedom? It's by essentially having financial freedom, independence. But when you don't grow up being rich, you need to earn that money initially. So you need to
Mhm.
make a salary, you need to work for other people. So the best way to earn money is either to, work in finance, etc., or do something that you actually enjoy doing and do it in markets where people typically don't want to work, because then you have danger pay, etc., more career opportunities, you can grow faster. So from day one, I knew that was my target. Um, and to do this, you generally need to have degrees that are respected. And then after, you need to position yourself to try to aim for these companies that send people to such markets. So that was my plan from day one. I executed the plan. It went well. Thank God. And then I
Let,
did
let,
that.
let's talk about the execution of the plan because
Yeah,
it's important, right?
sure. Cool.
Talk to us about did you have goals for your plans? What were they? How did you achieve them? I'm sorry to cut you in the middle, but you're giving us some good information here that, I want to dive deep into a lot of it.
So I wanted to build an atypical profile, something different. So whenever I had a semester off, or there was my summer break, instead of just smoking weed on a couch or getting a job doing whatever, I would go into emerging markets and find internships. So, I'd go do an internship in Russia. I would
Mhm.
go do an internship in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. Or if I went traveling, I would go do it in some emerging market to again get experience. So that when I found myself going through these rather rigorous job interviews, I had experience that was relevant, and
Mhm.
I was well positioned.
Right. Did you so you planned it out, right? You had a vision. You first were able to see it in your mind and say, this is what I want to do. How can I set myself apart from everybody else and have a leg up?
Yeah.
Right.
Because so I'm from Europe, and
Mhm.
generally in Europe it's a lot harder to get these salaries that one can get in the US. An auditor, for example, for Ernst and Young, who's been an auditor for 4 to 5 years in Belgium, is probably earning only $40,000 net a year. The guy's probably saving $5 to $10,000 a year. That's not going to get you any financial independence anytime soon,
Right.
especially when you're contributing into a broke system. So
Mhm.
you're going to get nothing out of it. You'll just be paying for the past generation. So I had to aim for those countries where people don't want to go.
And that's exactly where people don't want to go. It's funny because there's a story, right? It says these Nike sent out their shoe salesman to some African country or tribe out in the middle of nowhere, And the guy calls up and he goes, "Hey man, everybody here is barefoot. There's no market for that kind of stuff." And then Adidas sends their guy out and he goes, "Dude, everybody here is barefoot. It's open market for us. Let's go." Right. So it's all about that perspective on the type of market, right? So you're going into places where other people are going, I'm not too sure about, right? You're
Mhm.
going in, you're learning the nuances of these markets. You're learning, how to minimize the risk going into these markets for your investors, for your company, whatever it is you're doing, right? You're basically what you're doing for yourself in those markets, we do in real estate back here in the States, right? When we go into different markets, you got to dive in, you got to know every little bit about that market, about what's going on, what are the economics, right? What are the flow of economics? What's the good and services coming in and out? But aren't there other ways of picking or doing business in emerging markets than going into those types of markets that people really tend to shy away from?
Well, I mean, sure, you can get sent to Thailand, but you won't get paid a premium, much of a
Mhm.
premium, because everyone wants to go to Thailand. But if you ask to get sent to Nigeria, no one wants to go to Nigeria. So guess what? Companies are going to have to pay premium for it. Same thing. If you want easy money, really just learn engineering, and learn to work on some offshore drilling stuff and get sent to West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You'll make a lot of money, and then you'll be able to retire relatively quickly if you manage your money well on the side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just
So,
I don't have the aptitude for engineering, so I had to go for
right.
what I like, which is business.
So you went into the corporate world, right? You went into the Nestle's, and then you went into Switzerland and so forth and whatnot. And like I said in my intro, by the way, I worked for one of the companies on Wall Street that brought Nestle's over into the U.S. Many years ago, and it was interesting to see. Never knew that Nestle's was I don't remember. Yeah, it was a private owned company, I think it was, or you could only buy stock in Nestle's if you were Swiss national. That was it.
Hmm.
You couldn't buy if you weren't. And then they opened it up to the world, and it went ballistics. So talk about the transition from being in the corporate world to investing, and what kind of investing you're doing right now.
So it wasn't intentional. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't 100% intentional at that point. So I left the company. I turned 30. I thought, cool. I spent most of my 20s in Africa. I'm ready for a new challenge. I was thinking of moving to the Middle East and getting a job in the Gulf. And before doing that, I went on a road trip from Oman, so near Dubai, to
Mm-hmm.
Paris. So
Wow.
going through all
Nice.
of Iran, going through Armenia, going through Georgia, all of Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, Eastern Europe,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And when you work in corporate and you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you always have deadlines, you have a lot of pressure. The reality is that there's a very big opportunity cost in terms of your money, in terms of your savings, because you do not have the time nor the mental space to allocate to managing your own money. So you miss out on opportunities and you end up making suboptimal investments.
Mm-hmm.
That's a true cost. And for once, I actually had time to think. I'd travel around and I'd be driving around. I wouldn't be pressed for time at all. I typically never knew where I'd be sleeping the next day. And that I had time to think. I had time to spot opportunities. I had time to explore. So I started doing deals. I started doing some real estate deals. I was like, okay, that's interesting. I could potentially flip that. Okay, let me
Right.
try that. And then I started, flipping apartments, flipping houses, in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, in the Balkans mostly. And as these deals were working well, after I was done with the road trip, I just kept pushing back, getting a job, and I never got a job again.
We're unemployable.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So you started your real estate career in the Balkans? or that's where you had most of your portfolio?
I already had assets in the US and
Uh,
Central Europe, etc., and some cash, and then in Africa as well. But
what are some of the crazy stories from places that you've been with dealing with your real estate all over the world?
so a deal in the Balkans where I shook hands with a developer who didn't even have the land yet, who didn't have a building permit. He didn't have anything. He just saying that's my project. He didn't even own the land. And we shook hands on it. My lawyer was like, "You do know that like that contract he wants to make you sign doesn't actually mean anything legally." I was like,
Right.
"I know." I paid 30% up front,
Wow.
and yeah, the project went extremely well. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone though.
Yeah, right. Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's funny because when I was traveling in India, right, only nationals can own land. So a lot of Israelis, what they would do is they would make friends with people, right, with different landowners, and they'd say, okay, you know what, let's partner up together. They'd make an agreement between the two of them. The Israeli would go and buy the land, and then they go back to Israel to get more money and stuff and whatnot. They come back, and the guy would, and, and a lot of times, the local would be like, "What agreement? This is my land. It's in my name." And so many people lost their shirts and lost money and tens of thousands of dollars on these deals with the locals.
Yeah. So the difference with a little country like Montenegro was doing such deals is that it's a small country of 600,000 people. So everyone knows each other. So if you're going to screw someone over,
Mm,
it'll be like everyone will know about it and you're finished.
right.
So you just do your due diligence essentially by asking people around, like, is this person trustworthy, etc. If the person
Mhm.
has a good reputation, the reality is a handshake agreement is worth more than a
Right.
contract.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, in
Absolutely.
India, no. Or in most African countries, no.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, what would you say from your experience from the countries that you've invested in and bought and sold real estate? What would you say is the one that has probably some of the craziest laws?
I wouldn't say that generally laws aren't too crazy. Um, the craziest laws that you'll find is mostly in Western Europe and in places like California, where if you have a tenant, you can't kick them out.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
if you end up with like a single mom and two kids, like, and it's winter, like, gosh, like, you're
Mm-hmm.
you're out of luck.
You're out of
Um,
luck.
and actually, in in emerging markets, generally as a landlord, you have more rights. So I wouldn't say it's really a matter of laws being crazy. It's more a matter of whether just the court system and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
whether they work or not.
Right.
That's it.
Like
On
here,
paper, they're generally fine everywhere.
in Arkansas, uh, it's a super friendly, a landlord friendly state. The landlord does not have to provide drywall, doesn't have to provide appliances, running water. I mean, it doesn't have to provide anything to the tenant. Now, it all depends on what you agree with with the landlord in your lease, right? But yeah, like for example, in Israel, the government owns the land and they lease it back to the people, right? So if you and I would be doing a transaction, I would look at how long your land lease is, right? And you'd be like, look, I only have 20 years left. Well, if you only have 20 years, then your land is worth so much because now I have to go in and I have to buy another 70 years and it's going to cost me X amount of money and so forth. So, that's what goes on over there, which is very different
Yeah.
than here in the US, for example, right? Or
And
even,
then the
I
risk
guess.
is diaspora people who invest in Israel then end up
Mhm.
overpaying because they don't quite understand the depreciation that goes along with such a lease, which is
Exactly.
massive. Same thing
Mhm.
in London. Foreigners
Mhm.
often get played. They buy, they think it's cheap, but they don't realize the level of depreciation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, there's like you said, it's not necessarily the laws, but it's like the customs, the what goes on in the different countries. So let's talk to the listeners here. And when you're investing and you're going into a new market, if when you're going to research, right, an emerging market, because not only do you research cities and states, but you also research countries,
Yeah.
right? For
Yeah.
for for that. So what is it that you look for? What is it that people, when they're looking into new markets, what should they be focusing on?
So first, the way I operate is I have a map of the world in my head, and I form a view on I form a thesis and a view on some macro trends. And then these macro trends lead me to some jurisdictions. Then I look at the jurisdiction more in detail, try to see, okay, cool. So there's this very good tailwind. Are there more tailwinds for this jurisdiction apart from the themes I was looking into? Are there any headwinds, etc.? If I believe that a country is investable from a macro point of view, then typically what I'll do is I'll go there, I'll fly there, I'll spend a month, 2 months, three
Mhm.
months on the ground, and then I'll try to figure out how do I play these tailwinds? How do I play this macro story? Sometimes it's real estate. Sometimes, I mean, for example, I wanted to do this in Uzbekistan 3 years ago. I went there because the macro was great. I went there. I wanted to buy real estate in the center of the city because it was very affordable, about $1,000 a square meter in a booming city, actually. And when I was there, I saw that the stock market was supremely undervalued. And there were companies growing at 40, 50, 60% a year,
Wow.
giving out dividend yields of 15%
Wow.
at like P ratios of 3, that had like a near monopoly. So I saw this and I was like, ooh, I think this is the better way to play it. So instead, I just, opened a local brokerage account and put the money I had planned on investing in real estate. I just put it in that brokerage account and bought a bunch of local companies, a mix of local companies. And, and it went very well. But essentially, I go there and I try to see how do I play it. And sometimes it's stocks, sometimes it's real estate, sometimes it's nothing at all, sometimes it's investing in a private business. It depends.
What are some of the criteria that you look at or you want to see for you to get on a plane and go to that market?
Just the macro story. Does the country have a good macro story? Like, for example, right now, if you're looking at, we're heading towards a food crisis and potentially an energy crisis as well. So I would probably want to invest for the next few years until this situation gets resolved in countries that are net exporters of food and or of energy. So when you look at a map of the world, there aren't too many countries that export both, or they're export at least one of them heavily. For example, food. Not that many net food exporters. Some of them in Europe, but they have their own issues. Then, if you look in Latin America, you'll see random little countries like Paraguay that are heavy food exporters. You have Brazil, which is a net food exporter and that exports a lot of oil. So that might be an interesting play. But then again, they have presidential elections coming soon with potentially a socialist coming back to power, which is not great. So you got to look into all of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you gotta really take a bird's eye view and see
Yeah.
which way the winds are blowing.
Yeah. And then once you arrive in a country, then you just take your time. You go out a lot. You try to meet people. You buy beers because people love talking after a beer or two. Everyone loves talking about real estate. That's a universal truth across the
Right.
world.
Right.
People love talking about their local real estate market.
Mm-hmm.
And often what you find is that there are many similarities between real estate markets across the world or in terms of trends, but sometimes there's just a delay of a few years, sometimes a few decades, and you can potentially exploit this because people think a certain way, but you know that based on similar markets in the past, markets evolved in a certain direction. You can potentially play that. And Yeah, do a lot of cold calling. So what I love the most is just walking into a number of random real estate agencies and speaking to the local real estate agents and seeing what they have to say.
Hmm.
80% of the time they talk nonsense, but that's real estate agents for you. Um, but you will find good ones. And then
Hmm.
you pose as a buyer. Sometimes you pose as a tenant, as a
Hmm.
potential tenant, to get a feel for the market, see what they have to offer, etc. Obviously, you check all the resources online. Often you'll find that actually it's not necessarily local websites that are better for online listings, but Facebook groups. You can get a lot of information on Facebook groups.
Hmm.
Some like local Facebook groups. You usually get prices that are closer to reality on local Facebook groups than on random websites where it's mostly agencies that post.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great advice, and that's absolutely, that's you hit it on the nose, right? You got to go in there and you got to know the market. When, like you said, people love talking about real estate.
Yeah.
You know.
And just look at your own market in the United States. For Europeans, the US is a confusing market in the sense that, if you go into Texas, you go into, let's say, Austin, and you see a house that's 20 years old. For Europe, that's fine. That's not old. That's not an old
Hmm.
house. And
Hmm.
inside it'll look very decent for European standards. An
Right.
American will go in there and be like, it's a 20-year-old house. It's old. The kitchen it looks like it needs to be redone completely. And as a
Hmm.
European, I'll be like, no, the kitchen is completely fine. So, and then there's the whole school district thing where a house just literally across the street could be 30% cheaper. A European will be like, oh my God, it's just across the street. It's 30% cheaper. It's such an arbitrage. But yeah, but no, your kids are going to send to a horrible school.
Right.
That's why there's such a difference. Like a Scandinavian has no idea that this is even a concept. So imagine how foreigners can make these mistakes in your own market in the US. So
Hmm.
can you even imagine the mistakes that you as an American can make overseas?
Oh,
You'll be
absolutely.
making mistakes you don't even know are mistakes. You don't even know they can be mistakes. They're like unknowns in your reality.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. And the customs and the way of doing business. I sold a property in Israel that I owned, and very different than the U.S. The wholesale process. They came up with a 10% deposit, and then 3 months later was another 10% deposit, and then 2 months after that. So you can see how long the process is. It's not a 30, 60 day, it's not a 30 it was 4 or 5 months of
Yeah,
a closing,
yeah, yeah.
and
Liquidity. Yeah,
you're biting your teeth and you're going, come on, I hope this goes to and it's just another, and then they come up with another deposit, and now the bank came up with the mortgage. So now they give part of the mortgage, and all the way up until the closing. And at the end of the closing, they zero it out, and you get your money. So it's very different. And absolutely. And that's why so many people get scammed, you
yeah,
know, on with real estate, with buying over. So you gotta, when you're working with people and you want to buy real estate overseas and whatnot, you gotta talk to someone like yourself who knows the market, who does the research, right?
yeah,
You gotta talk to someone who knows that local market.
yeah. Very important. Very, very important. Or
You
else,
know.
look, and to be honest with you, it's hard to get better deals than locals. So imagine if you did not have all your local network and
Mhm.
all your local knowledge, and you just arrived from Florida into your local market. You wouldn't be getting better than average deals. The
Mhm.
best you can hope for realistically is just getting a fair deal.
Mhm.
And that's something that people need to accept when they go and invest overseas. What you're hoping for, what you're aiming for is to get a fair deal. Great deals are typically done by locals.
Mhm.
You, as a foreigner, going to wherever, to Italy for 2 weeks and buying a house, you're probably not going to get that. Um, so what you're trying to do is to avoid overpaying. which is very common as a foreigner, overpaying.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's and that's what we've been seeing in the US market for the last several years is all this foreign money coming in and the market just going 20% more than yesterday. And the foreign money going, okay. And then the next guy or the next girl comes up, and then you're going, all right, 20% more than yesterday. They're going, sure, we'll pay it, no problem. And the locals, we're going, wait a minute, you're jacking the prices up so high, right? That you're kind of also beating out the locals. Locals then get beat out, and they have to move out, right? And I was talking to someone about that, and that kind of starts the recession in a way. Because now you've got locals that are leaving the area because they can't afford it anymore. So now jobs are being taken away because you've got foreign money coming in. The foreign money is only money. It's not bodies, right? Now the local bodies are going to other markets. So that market is now going to start kind of going down a little bit. And that cycle starts to happen. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that happening in the near future?
Look, we see this happening in a lot of countries. People are starting to wake up across many jurisdictions or people are starting to believe that inflation is here to stay, or it's going to be around for much longer than what they were told. And a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines with very large amounts of cash. And they want to buy stuff they can touch. So, for example, I'll give you an example in Turkey. So it's an interesting learning. So Turkey has been the market for the last 10 years was just horrific in Istanbul, just went down, and in dollar terms. So in local currency it was going up, but because the currency was depreciating or devaluating so much, then in dollar terms, the prices were going down, and they reached a bottom last year. And then what happened is at some point in November, the currency collapsed. It dropped approximately 50% within a few weeks.
Wow.
Big collapse. And people were expecting, myself included, that real estate prices would either go down in USD terms, that there would be a window of opportunity to get cheap real estate, or that they would just kind of stay the same and keep in dollar terms because, it was a bit of a hedge and we had reached the bottom. So what happened is that pretty much no one managed to get a good deal because what happened is all the deposits just got given back to buyers. So if there was a deal at that point, like sellers, like, I'm out of this deal, I'll pay the penalty, whatever. Here's your cash and the penalty. I'm out. I'm not selling right now. Because the last thing you want is cash in your bank account when it's depreciating by a few percentage points every day.
Right.
And you had all of this cash on the sidelines locally that just needed to find a home, and it just all went into property. So prices have actually gone up since then by 20-25% in USD terms. Now, is it sustainable in the sense that once all that money on the sidelines is invested in bricks, well, then, where's the extra money going to come from? And maybe prices are going to start going down again. But I don't know. But in the initial stages of inflationary pressure and fast currency depreciation, people rush towards real estate, and the yields actually get compressed, the rental yields, and at the same time. So everyone's rushing, prices go up, but rental rates don't necessarily go up either. But it's a dynamic that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on buying real estate in the Soviet Union right now, or going into the stock market there?
Cool. So I made that mistake myself. I bought a bunch of Russian stocks when the Russians took the first parts of the the little provinces in the east, which
Mm-hmm.
were breakaway republics, and the
Right.
Russians sent troops into the breakaway republics. I thought that would be it. And there was a huge dip in Russian stocks. I took a bunch. Within 2 days, I got frozen out of those stocks. And I still see them in my brokerage account with zero out of that zero. I can't trade them. I can't sell them. They're there.
Oh
So
man.
I'll just have to wait and see. I mean, it's part of the game. You play, and sometimes you don't win. You don't win them all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And what do you think about real estate? Do you think it's a good time to go in there and buy real estate?
It would have been when the ruble was down, but the
Mm-hmm.
ruble is back up. And Russians now have a problem in the sense that it's hard to get money outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to move money internationally as a Russian. And at the same time, Russians are a little nervous about their banking system, though it's actually withheld the sanctions very well up to now. So what we're seeing is a lot of Russians are just buying real estate. So prices are going up. But as a non-Russian, investing in Russia right now is just risky, just because the Russians might take your assets, not because they want to, but as retaliation for what the West has done to Russians overseas, which was take their assets.
Right.
So even though it's actually none of your business, you just end up paying for your own politicians' decisions.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So not every emerging market or every
Oh no!
struggling market is a good market to go into.
Look, sometimes people often think that there's a clean correlation between risk and returns.
Mm-hmm.
There are some markets out there that are risky and that have terrible returns, and you can just see it. It's just right there in the numbers. I mean, if you go into Tehran in Iran, you look at the real estate market there, it is very high. Prices are very high. Rental yields are extremely low. And you wonder what the upside is, because the upside is if the country opens up, people are going to start getting money out of Iran to invest somewhere else. So probably
Mm-hmm.
won't even have that much of an impact on real estate prices. So you'd just be taking an insane amount of, well, not just economic risk, but obviously also regulatory risk, because U.S. people are not allowed to invest in Iran.
Right.
So, but yeah, more risk does not necessarily mean better returns for sure.
Mm-hmm. What kind of what kind of real estate do you look for?
It depends on the market. I'm completely agnostic. I personally go for residential generally because it's a market
Mm-hmm.
that I have a better grasp with.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done too much commercial, but yeah, typically residential.
Residential.
Mhm.
Yeah, very nice. What's let's talk about, we're both travelers. We like to travel. Share some awesome stories from your travel. Where have you been to that was like, wow? I mean, I know, we get asked that a lot, right? What was the one place? What is a place? But what is a place that really had a strong effect on you?
A place that had a strong effect on me.
Yeah.
Interesting. Look, I'd say that America in the 90s was nice. It really was. It was, people were friendly, people got along with each other. There was the sense
Hmm.
of freedom. Business was easy. You could trust your neighbor.
Right.
I think that had a big impact on me in terms of how to conduct business.
Hmm.
In terms of crazier countries, or in terms of places, I'd say South Africa is absolutely a beautiful country. I would not invest there. I would not become a tax resident there because the tax system is just terrible. But as a country with in terms of sheer amount of beauty and diversity and landscapes and national parks and safaris and interesting people and pretty good infrastructure, it's a great way to discover Africa, essentially Africa 101. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
always recommend South Africa.
that's one place that's on my bucket list. That's on my list of places where I haven't been to yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to going there. What's a place that you haven't visited that you want to go?
So I want to go to Paraguay. I'm going to go there later this year to explore opportunities on the ground because of the macro story,
What
and I
opportunities are you
want to
looking
go
at
check it
in
out myself. Because
what kind of opportunities in Paraguay? Is it real estate? Is it or are you just going to see what opportunities are there?
I'll go check what opportunities are there. I'll also be going to Venezuela
Mm-hmm.
in Q4. I'll go there for a few weeks to look at real estate's insanely cheap right now. Prices have started going up. Agricultural land, you can get an acre for about $70 of like quality agricultural land. Yes,
Wow.
and and foreigners are allowed to buy. Yes, you heard me right. Yeah. So
$70
it's crazy.
an acre?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. $120 per hectare. Yeah, of
Wow.
like quality. I mean, it's out in the sticks, but it's
Right.
fertile.
It's fertile land
I was
that you
look
can work.
I was looking at 500 hectares for $60,000, and it's even got a lake in the middle.
Oh my
Like so,
God.
just yeah, yeah, yeah. It's about 4.5 hours from Caracas, the capital, so far, but not
Mm-hmm.
that far.
It's not bad at
And
all, man.
Venezuela, for all its faults, it is the country with the biggest oil reserves in the world, ahead of Saudi Arabia. So
Mm-hmm.
at some point, it'll probably wake up. And when you're buying land, fertile land in the midst of a food crisis and energy crisis in the world's top oil reserves, I see a few potential tailwinds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
The risk
Interesting.
the risk then is a fewfold. So making sure that the transaction goes smoothly, because there's a lot of corruption, that what you buy is actually the land and not just a piece of paper. So that's one. Two, how do you actually manage it? Because you can't just leave it empty or else it'll just turn
Right.
into jungle. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
maintain it somehow. So you need to find locals, typically people there full time. You can get people for $150, $200 a month to maintain the land. But are they actually going to work? Or are you
Right.
just going to be paying $150 for them to just do other stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And then also making sure that you don't have like random farmers that just
Right.
set up shop on
Squatter.
your land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And then after 4 years, there's potentially a law that says that because of usage rights, if you used
Right.
it for X amount of time, it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those are all matters that all need to explore there
So,
and go
so
meet
share
lawyers.
with us, share with us how you do that research. How do you go
So I
about
would go there.
finding finding out, yes, this is the land. I'm not just buying the paper, and how do you, how do you,
Cool. So if you want to be safe, especially in markets that can be a bit ridiculous like that, I would simply go to some Western embassy. You'd look at the German embassy, the Swiss embassy, the French embassy. They often have lists of recommended lawyers. And generally, if embassies recommend lawyers, they're better than average. But
mm-hmm.
it also means that they're more expensive than average. But that's the cost of doing business
Sure.
in a ambiguous market when you're just the stupid foreigner. You just get
Mm-hmm.
better lawyers. That's the
Right.
cost.
Right.
Um, so you get the good lawyers to do all of the due diligence for you. Every single step is done with them. Then I would get them to recommend a surveyor or whatever to go check the land, to double check everything. And then for employing people, I would talk to the existing landlord, see which people are currently employed. I would try to meet them. I try to get a feel for them. I would then go attend mass at the local church. I would go introduce myself to the local priest. I would then discuss with the priest, make a small donation or whatever. and say, hey, I'm buying land in your parish, somewhere in your parish. I might need good Christians to work on the land. Are there any people in your parish that are good, dependable Christians that would, are good workers? And that's usually a good way of filtering people, because if you have the endorsement of the pastor, of the priest, you generally get better people, and then the priest also wouldn't just recommend anyone because his reputation is on the line.
Sure.
So that's something that works quite well in Africa, where you speak to the pastor or the priest, you speak to the chief of the village, etc. Latin America, it's slightly different, but that's one method that works in rural areas.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That is some great information. Not only now can we go out there and find properties in the US, but now we can go out and find properties all around the world. Travelers, I hope listening out there, you're out there and you're wandering the world and spaceship Earth. Take notes, man, because wherever you are, you can go and you can find opportunities, right? But like Ladislas, like you said, not all risk is worth the taking. Not all risk has a reward.
Correct.
So be careful out there, right? But just know that there are opportunities everywhere.
Indeed.
Right? You gotta be open to them. You gotta put on, I don't know how old you are, but Columbo, right? He was a detective, right? Put on the detective hat and start asking questions like Columbo. Right? Just start asking questions. Just go there and dig, dig, dig. So is that where you're headed off to Paraguay?
In Q4, yeah.
In Q4. Okay. All right,
okay.
cool.
But I have a few trips. I'm going to Turkey, Czech Republic, Switzerland, Mexico. I have a whole bunch of trips left. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Are you married? Do you have kids?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you take them with you, or is this
the kids not yet, but yeah, a religious wedding. Yeah, I went through a religious wedding.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Very cool. And where do you live now? Are you in Europe? Are you in the US? Where are you
That's a long story, but technically I live in Ukraine, so that's not working out too well as a residency. So
not a good time to be in Ukraine right now.
So I'm traveling a lot. Yeah.
Got it. Very nice. All right, my man. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. You dropped some serious gold bombs on us, and some information for people listening. It's going to be on, travelers and anyone listening today. You can check us out on Spotify, our iHeartRadio, all the different podcast channels. Listen over and over again to what Ladislas has to say about researching the markets, how to find them, what to do, what you're looking for, tailwinds, everything. And, you can break it down to the micro as well, meaning you can do the same type of research here in the US by when you're looking out to go out and buy either single family residence, commercial, multifamily, whatever it is, go out and do research on the market. Know the market. Know your market like the back of your hand. Know exactly what's coming in, what's going on, who the players are, what the local government is all about, right? And go ask questions. So thank you so much for being here, man. We wish you good luck. One question before we go. How do you raise your capital for your investments?
I use my own capital.
You use your own capital? Okay. Yeah. Do you ever partner up with people, or you just go out there and do it on your own?
I do. Sometimes I do. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey man, I wish you tons of success. Happy trails. Maybe I hope one day our paths will cross in some market somewhere or in some mountain, somewhere around the world. But thanks for being on the show, man.
Cheers.
All right, travelers, I want to leave you with this one last thought. Being born poor was not your fault. Dying poor is. There's absolutely no reason for you to be out there and not be successful. We have the internet. We have global information at our fingertips. Real estate works. You may not work. I'm Ladislas Maurice, the traveling investor. I'll see you somewhere on Spaceship Earth next week, same bat time, maybe a different place. I'll talk to you guys soon. Be well.